We're going to talk a little Syracuse. We've got Brian Higgins with us from ESPN Syracuse. How you doing today, Brian?
Good, Sean. Good to see you. I'm used to talking women's hoops with you, but fun to talk football that matters here
That's
this
right.
year.
That's right. Well, I guess from at least one perspective, it matters more right now. But I guess you can obviously make the case from the Notre Dame perspective. A win would go a long way the way this season's going now. So we'll see how things go on Saturday, I guess. This is Dino Babers' seventh season there at
Yeah.
Syracuse, and he's only had one previous winning season. He's obviously well on his way right now. Their first loss came to Clemson last week. How much did he need a season like this with where he is up there?
Oh, absolutely. Now, was he going to lose his job this year? I think a lot of people assumed yes if they didn't make a bowl game, but the athletic director John Wildhack was out loud that he's not on the hot seat before the start of the season, and then Pete Thamel a couple months ago kind of reported on his buyout information, and then you realized he was probably going to be here another year regardless, and this was like a complete collapse. So I think he was legit going to be here another year regardless. But setting aside actually being employed, he needed this badly because the 2018 season, and Syracuse played Notre Dame that season, and that was
Right.
A Notre Dame playoff year. Like the 2018 season, it was great, but it was very senior driven, and you had all these high hopes for the next year, and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the people trying to step up, it just didn't happen. So this year, you've got stuff, you got guys, and you've got to take advantage of it while you have the chance. I think, Sean, that's what we've learned in college football. Like, you're not going to get another chance to have a jumping off season. And I think we're hoping that that's what this is going to be.
Very true. How is he thought of by the fan base right now? Again, in year 7 years down the road with what's been, kind of mixed, I guess.
Well, I think it's twofold. Like, everyone, for the most part, likes Dino. He's got a great personality. He's got all these little quirky sayings and all this stuff. Like, you have to like the guy. You'd prefer more than one winning season in 6 years.
Right.
That said, it's not like Syracuse was rolling into Dino being here off a great recent history of success. So it's not like Notre Dame where you're on the hot seat after a game, which you guys have seen this year. So I think people like Dino. Obviously, they want to be good at football. They were willing to give him some runway, but I think the runway was ending if not for this season.
He brought in, of course, a new offensive coordinator this season, Robert Anae, who was with Bronco Mendenhall at Virginia. Their offense seems to be more diverse as a result. What's the impact that Anae has had?
Well, this is where I'm going to give Dino the most credit over the last couple of years. He, first, a few years ago, the defense wasn't working. And he had never played a 3-3-5 defense before and went out and got Tony White. He's like, this defense is hard for me to play against. Went out and got somebody he'd never worked with before. And this time he did the same thing on offense and got Robert Anae and the quarterback coach, Jason Beck, both came over from Virginia. And the offense specifically has been Dino's offense. Multiple offensive coordinators because they've, moved on or whatever over the course of the last 6 years, but it has been Dino's offense. Now he's brought in a new guy with different ideas. And I'll give Dino full credit on that for saying, hey, I need to make a change on offense. And I think Anae's been great. And the infusion of what he does and what Dino's does, it's mixed together. And I think we see that this season. I think we got a little problem with how they called the game in the second half, maybe at Clemson the last week. But setting aside that, I think Robert Anae has been a great addition this season.
Well, I think coaches do. They get kind of stuck in their own ways sometimes, and they've kind of got that happened with Brian Kelly after that 2016 season when Syracuse, when Notre Dame and Syracuse played out there in East Rutherford, and he did the same thing. Went out, got outside coordinators on both sides of the ball, really went outside his comfort zone, and it seemed to help. I think maybe coaches need to realize that sometimes that they need to get out of their comfort zone.
And that's what Dino did. Now, like his staff, I don't know if insular is the right word, but it mostly, for the first few years, I mean, initially you hire guys you work with. Of course you do that. That makes sense. But he kind of stuck with that. Like all of his offensive coordinators, and he had 3 of them, they were within the system. There were no new ideas coming in. So I think this kind of infused some fresh blood. And the quarterback coach, in Jason Beck, I give him great credit for working with Garrett Schroeder. Like the leaps he's made from last year to this, part of it's the offense, but I think part of it is Anae and Beck they've worked with him in a way that has made him a huge leap here into his second year in Syracuse.
Well, and I'm curious about him, Schrader. He started off at Mississippi State,
Hmm.
where he played quarterback, and then they were ready to move him to receiver. And he's like, I'm not a receiver, I'm transferring. So he ends up
Yeah.
at Syracuse, and now he's gone from a 52% passer last year to 70%. He's already thrown 13 touchdowns. Al Golden, Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, called him a tight end playing quarterback. How's he kind of gone, from that story where they were ready to move him to wide receiver at Mississippi State to the kind of year he's having this year for Syracuse?
Well, I mean, what happened in Mississippi State, like he's recruited under one coaching staff. Joe Moorhead gets fired after a couple of years. That was after that weird, every egg bowl is weird. That egg bowl was very weird. There was people pretending to pee on footballs like dogs. There's a lot going on.
That's
Every
right.
coach involved lost in the game, lost their job. So in comes Mike Leach. Like, you've got a quarterback that can throw it, but he's a huge running threat. Mike Leach doesn't care about that. So he put some other guy in and said, well, you're a great athlete. Why don't you play wide out? So Garrett did it, but he never wanted to do that. So he's into the portal. And, he had a bunch of different offensive coordinators and coaches and all this stuff every year. So I think a lot of this is, I get it's a new OC, but it's second year in the same place. And he was hurt last season. And that's what happens when you're a big dude like him. He got hit a lot. He was worn down and beaten up by the end of last season. So I think he's healthier now and in an offense that suits him. And Sean, what's wild is, he was last few games of last season under 50%. I mean, that's unheard of in these days. If the season ends today, he currently has the Syracuse single season completion percentage record, which no one would have guessed at any point last year.
Marcus Freeman sounded pretty impressed with the running back Sean Tucker the other day, and you were talking about the second half against Clemson. I'll get to that in a second, but he had a big year last year. Sean Tucker did. Is there anyone that you would compare this guy to that you've seen?
Well, I'm trying to remember who it was that actually said this. I think it's been multiple people that have compared him to Austin Eckler. If you're looking for an NFL comparison, because Sean's he's not a huge guy. I mean, he's a huge guy if you look at him, but he's not tall. I mean, but he is a big dude for 5'9" or whatever he is. But he's got great speed. They're using him more in the passing game this year. I don't think he's as good of a pass catcher as Eckler is, but it's not a weakness in his game. But he was fantastic last year. I mean, he set at Syracuse, of all places, Jim Brown, Ernie Davis, Floyd Little, Joe Morris. He set the single season school rushing record last year and broke a Joe Morris record that was more than 4 decades old. So he had a phenomenal year last year. And where that's changed Sean into this year is, well, everyone knows that now. He is, and it doesn't matter what's happened. I think we found this now 7 games into the season. It does not matter how much Syracuse is showing you anything else they're capable of, and that's part of Schrader's success. They are not going to go away from trying to shut this guy down, which I think bleeds into last week. He only got 5 carries. And honestly, I don't care what the other defense is doing. It's inexcusable. Like, you can't have your guy who, and he's not going to win the Heisman, we know that, but you were building a Heisman campaign around this guy. He can't have 5 carries. Well, and especially against Clemson.
And you're trying to protect a lead as well against that's what I don't get is like just looking at his line with all the games that he's had this year. I realize, they've got a good front and all that, but it's just, I think it shocked everyone to see 5 carries for a guy who ran for almost 1,500 yards last year. And, again, having the season he's having this year.
I think what surprised us is, you go against Clemson, you maybe have to tweak a little. Syracuse was going into that game, I feel, more as a fair fight than any time they'd played Clemson before. And that's saying they've beaten them before in the ACC. But, Robert and I, speaking of it, they went slightly against tendency in the first couple of drives, but in a way that worked. So you do that in the first half and it's working. Tucker only had 2 or 3 carries in the first half, but you had the lead. Now, what happened at halftime is Clemson adjusts to that. And then Syracuse never made the counter adjustment. You forgot to go back to Tucker. And I think that's the point that, if I'm Dino Babers, man, it would have been a hard time considering how that game ended. That's a hard time putting your head on the pillow on Saturday night, knowing your best player only got 5 carries in the game.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, they had him on the ropes, obviously, as you described. I mean, they got DJ Uiagalelei is out, Cade Klubnik is in, and of course, things unraveled in the fourth quarter. Were you more surprised at the meltdown or that they were up so big in the fourth quarter to begin with?
I thought Syracuse had a chance in the game. It was one where I went in and I thought Syracuse could win the game without a lot of just, random stuff happening. Because I thought, Clemson is not, they're good. They're very good. But they're not Trevor Lawrence you're good. They're not Deshaun Watson you're good. They're not those national title teams good. Their defense is close to that, but maybe not as much on offense. So I thought Syracuse could play with them, and especially on the defensive end. And you forced 4 turnovers. What stunk is you got points off one and that you returned one for a touchdown. The other 3 takeaways, you didn't score. And you've got the 14-point lead in the second quarter. You're still up 10 in the third. One of the takeaways, you got the ball at the 50. And not that you're guaranteed to score, but you couldn't even get into field goal range. And I think that combined, that like Tucker on that drive didn't get a carry. It's that stuff that I think lingers after the game, that it's one where, man, you're up 10. Your defense is good enough. You needed one more scoring drive, basically. You couldn't do anything in the second half. I think that's the part that stings most after the fact.
Yeah. How have they handled that this week?
You know what? They're saying all the right things. And you know that every team always says all the right things, but they do their player interview sessions on Tuesdays. So, got to chat with a couple of guys Tuesday morning over at the complex. And it felt that it wasn't lip service. It felt right. Now, that said, and I've said this on my show all week, Sean, is that I get it's Notre Dame, but Syracuse and Notre Dame, this is not what we thought it was going to be 2 months ago, when 2 months ago the Arch would have been double-digit dogs, and who knows what it would have been. This is a game Syracuse, I don't want to say has to win, but again, speak of a fair fight. Like, the Arch are favored at home against Notre Dame. Go out and win the game. Go out and play well, at least. So I think we're going to see early in the game on Saturday, Sean, if this team is locked back in.
Tell me about this defense. Just looking at it, I've seen a little bit of them this year. Looking at the numbers, they look just solid across the board. Turnovers is the thing that kind of stand. You mentioned the 4 against Clemson. That's kind of the thing that stands out, is the turnovers they forced this season.
Yeah, I mean, they're forcing a ton. But even setting that aside, the forcing the turnovers is great, obviously. But they're playing well aside of that. They run this 3-3-5 defense, which is unusual. They're not big up front, and guys are hurt. They've lost guys back and forth. So I'm intrigued to see who they get back, hopefully this week, because they're starting to get banged up a little bit. But man, they got 2 outstanding linebackers. They had 3 outstanding linebackers to start the season. Stephon Thompson was lost in the opener for the year, unfortunately. But Michael Jones, undersized, but he's an NFL guy at middle linebacker. Marlo Wax, one of the other linebackers at minimum, is going to get a look in the league at some point. He is their biggest game-changing playmaker kind of guy. And then the secondary, obviously, it's a 3-3-5. They need a lot of guys back there, and the depth has been tested recently in the secondary. They're hopeful, I think, to get Garrett Williams back this week at cornerback. He's one of, if not the best corner in the ACC. He got hurt 2 weeks ago. It's not a season thing. Did not play against Clemson. I think the hope is he's going to be back against Notre Dame. But, man, he is the full package at cornerback, and was sorely missed, I think, last week against Clemson.
It's been 19 years since Notre Dame and Syracuse played there in Syracuse, all the NFL stadium games and Yankee Stadium and all that stuff. How big a deal is this, just that Notre Dame is going to be playing there for the first time since 2003?
No, game sold out. This is back-to-back sellouts in the Dome. I do not remember the last time that's happened. It's been at least since McNabb was here, if not longer, even in large crowds. But NC State was sold out, and that was kind of, whoa, this game sold out. That's kind of cool. That happened out of nowhere. The Notre Dame ticket obviously was the hot ticket going back to when tickets were on sale. So I think there'll be like the NC State game. There was very few NC State fans there. There'll be plenty of Notre Dame there this week. And that goes for any Notre Dame game. But right. It's sold out. There's excitement about town. And, the comparison to that game back in 2003, Walter Reyes was the stud on the Orange team that year. He ran all over the Irish, 5 touchdowns, more than 200 yards. I think Syracuse fans are hoping anyway. I get Notre Dame's defense is good. That, all right, Sean Tucker, he's the Walter Reyes of today. Let's see if Sean can have a day, especially now after last week. Like, he's going to get the ball this week. They're not screwing that up 2 weeks in a row. Notre Dame knows that. We'll see what he does, but Tucker's going to get his carries this week.
Yeah, I would absolutely think so, especially, like you said, after last week with 5 carries. Brian Higgins from ESPN Syracuse. It's always great talking to you, Brian. Basketball is on the horizon, so I'll see you in person again soon, I'm sure.
All right, Sean. Yeah, we always look forward to hoops around here. We know that. But for a change, the first exhibition game was the other day. It's not actually basketball season yet in the Qs because football's doing so good.
That's right. All right. Hey, thanks again, Brian. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Sean.